A story. There's a fire in the forest, and the animals are all facing extermination. And they run to the river and swim across. They flee. But the scorpion can't swim, and he finds himself alone on the riverbank with the flames licking at the sandy shore, and he thinks, I'm going to die. And then he looks, and there is a frog. And he says, Mr. Frog, I can't swim. Please help me across the river and save my life. And the frog says, are you stupid? Do you think I will put you on my back? You will sting me. And the scorpion says, no, be reasonable, Mr. Frog. If I sting you, we'll both die, we'll both drown. Be reasonable. And the frog says, yeah, I suppose you're right, yeah, okay, hop on. We'll go across. The scorpion gets on the frog's back, and the frog starts swimming across the river. In the middle of the river, bang! The scorpion stings him, and the frog, feeling of poison coursing through his body, turns and says, Scorpion, we're both gonna die. Why did you do that? And the scorpion says, it's my nature. Now, that can be taken either as a joke, it's a good story, funny story, or it can be taken as a profound lesson. I think it is a very appropriate story which has enormous bearing on the crop circle circumstance. And maybe I'll tell you why, and maybe I won't. Okay, we start here. I've started each of these 4 lectures with strangeness, with something which actually kicks the door of our reality down. I've shown sheep circles, rocks in trees, and this year I want to show, I want to tell a personal story. I do a series of geometry workshops, which always starts with this famous diagram, which is called the Vesica Pisces. And in sacred geometry, this diagram is known as the start of the division of unity. Now, unity, God, heaven, divinity, is, for millennia, is seen as a circle. How do you make the first division? If the universe, all that is seen as a circle, how do you divide it to produce tables, television sets, giraffes, trees? Now, normally we'll say, bang, we take an axe and simply cut the circle in 2. We have 2 semicircles. But this gives you a very limited choice. This, in sacred geometry, is the first act. The red circle is centered on that little red dot. And then to divide it, you center the compass point, the center of the circle, the blue dot, anywhere on the perimeter of the first one, and you draw another circle. So instead of having one semicircle, two semicircles, you have 1, 2, 3 components. And those components generate a multiplicity of geometries. Next slide. In this room, I think, 15th of June, I think it was 2013, I was doing a geometry workshop. It was the wettest of days, and I hoped, with some arrogance, that the event would be celebrated by us receiving a crop circle. It often happens that events are marked by the arrival of a circle. And I stated this, but it was not to be. And I thought, oh, well, it's too wet, you know. And then 2 or 3 days later, this arrived. And when I looked, it arrived on the same Saturday, 13th of June, in Sicily. And I've been going to Sicily every year for 15 years, and this arrived in a field about 45 minutes from the hotel I always stay at. Now, one normally shrugs and says, oh, well, a coincidence. But this is one of the most precise, spare, exquisite renditions of the Vesica diagram, and it arrived, bing, on the same date as the workshop. I find that to be really strange. And I find that to be beyond coincidence. Next slide. Now, these, Gary mentioned the quintuplet, and this is a page from Alan Brand's exhaustive studies of the quintuplet, which fundamentally is a dice 5 spot. And the most popular, simple diagram we get, the most popular form we get is a simple circle. But following that very closely is the quintuplet, which exists like this as an isolated diagram, or very often is incorporated into larger, more complex circles, crop events. Next slide. Now, after some years of quintuplets, which I was very excited by, and I think we dealt with this in some detail in lecture 1. The beauty of the quintuplets was that they demonstrated absolutely that there was an intelligence. I mean, there are always a lot of people trying to normalize strangeness. And the way of normalizing strangeness, in the case of crop circles, there's been all kinds of weird things like whirlwinds and the pattern of fertilizer use and everything. But suddenly one looked at quintuplets on that previous diagram, and you see that whatever the size of them, the proportion of them, that page I showed was simply what we call the thin quintuplet, with small outriders at some distance, but there are also a series of fat quintuplets where the mother circle was bigger and the daughter circles were close to. There was a range, and the curious thing about them, very important, was that they obeyed right-angle geometry. There was a north-south axis and an east-west axis at 90 degrees. And there were a series of rules. The mother circle was always bigger. The daughters were always the same size as each other. The daughters were the same distance from the mother. And I thought, well, what could be more, how can I put it, unnatural than the rigorous compliance with a set of geometric rules? And then suddenly in 1997, we had this very strange formation, which was unique. And it broke certain rules. The mother circle was definitely bigger than the daughter circles, but the daughters were invading the body of the mother. And to emphasize it, the daughter circles were framed with their own circular ring. And I'd never seen anything like this before. And I couldn't understand it. Next slide. Then I realized that if you drew 4 lines connecting the centers of the daughter circles, they would create a square, the perimeter of which was exactly the same length as the mother circle. And this was an astonishment to me. Now, let me just explain the squaring of the circle thing. The square is seen as, and by several cultures, the symbol of the world, material reality, the third dimensional mechanical state we're in, while the circle is seen as God, divinity, heaven, all that is. And the problem for ancient philosophers and geometers was how to, given that you have the square, you have the world, how do you make a circle on the drawing board which has the same length of circumference as the circle has a perimeter? Now, by definition, these two are the same. But one of the problems here is that the key to the calculation of the circle involves pi. And pi is an irrational, infinite number, which at the moment, I think, goes to several million digits. How then can you make a calculation properly? You can't. We simplified here on Earth by using a simpler, we don't calculate it with 3 million digits. We do it with 22/7. 22 divided by 7 produces an approximation which is near enough for your average manufacturer of motor tires or dinner plates or anything circular, spherical, cylindrical, conical. Pi is this eternal constant. But what this geometrical difficulty states or implies fundamentally is that the earth can never be equal with heaven. We are obliged to keep trying, but we can never do it accurately on the drawing board. And we should learn from that. Okay, next one. Now, in the year 2000, something very strange was happening. I was being confronted with the number 29 in the crop circles, and 29 had no significance to me. Now, what we have here is 6 pentagram stars, 5 pointed stars. 6 times 5 is 30, but one of them has been torn away, has been bent. So we have 30 triangles, one has been taken away, 29. What did that mean? And I consulted all my numerologist friends. I said, what's the significance of 29? Nobody knew. Next slide. This is the view of it in relation to Silbury Hill. Next slide. So we have a situation there where we have 5 times 6 equals 30. 1 is broken off, 29. Next slide. Now here we have something very similar, a formation the previous year, which has 7 arms of 4 is 28, plus an extra circle in the center, 29. Next slide. That's a detail of it, showing how beautiful the in-between space is interwoven. Next slide. So here we have 7 circles. 7 times 4 is 28, plus 1 in the center, 29 again. What's going on with 29? Next slide. Here we are. On top, you have the scientific correct start of the pi number, and at the bottom, 22 divided by 7, which it gives you a working approximation, which, as you can see, is pretty damn close. It's certainly close enough for your average
fish pond in the garden.
Fish pond in the garden. Next slide. And then I realized that 29 was 22 plus 7. And how do you write plus in a wheat field? How do you, it's not plus, divided by. How do you signify divided by in a wheat field? And I imagine, I assume, we keep on banging 29 into their skulls, and somebody's going to realize that in fact it's 22 divided by 7. Next slide. There's a graphic demonstration. Next slide. Now, this was an astonishing formation. There are theoretically 30 points on each of the lobes, but as you see, the 2 end ones are removed. So on each of the lobes, you've got 29 points. And there it is again. And what was the date on which this arrived? This is astonishing. This arrived in 2000 on the 22nd of July. 22 of 7. I mean, they were really screaming at us. Next slide. And here we are again. There were 44 points around the perimeter of the circle, so 44 radially, and there were 7 rings of events. Once again, 22 over 7. Next slide. And here, to emphasize the thing, a 7-pointed star, a heptagram placed over it, precisely sizes and positioned the central flattened circle. Next slide. 7 has those meanings which are okay with me. Next slide. Now, this was a very much overlooked little formation in Froome, which was ignored really, and then I got a diagram from a guy, I think in Sweden, who sent me the following diagram. And he had been playing and found that a 22-sided polygon precisely sized and located the 2 major formations in the outer ring, but didn't deal with the small depression in the center ring. So I called him up and I said, "That's brilliant. There's your 22. Where's 7?" And he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And I said, "Okay, I'll see what I can do." Next slide. I put a 7-fold star in the middle, and it precisely located and sized the small element in the middle, 22 and 7 again. Next slide. Here was, once again, an overlooked formation at Old Sarum near Salisbury. Next slide. This diagram is by Alan Brown, and it shows the relationship between 7 and 11, not 22. Next slide. But this formation squares the circle precisely. The outer circle, the outer dimension of that black ring is precisely the same length as the perimeter of the square. Next slide. Funny little thing, this. Have a look at that little tuft on this side of the outer orbit ring. Next slide. That shows the way the tuft lines up with the major square. Next slide. That squares the internal dimension of the broad ring. Next slide. It also meticulously complies with Euclid's second theorem, which is that if you put an equilateral triangle in a circle, the contained circle is precisely half of the containing circle. Next slide. Now, what we have here in the bottom right corner is pi, the pi symbol. We've never had a pi before or since. This is the only formation in which pi itself was telegraphed. Next slide. This was wonderful. First of all, it was among the most beautiful crop circles I ever saw. This was 2008, and by this stage, I couldn't enter crop circles, but I looked at this. I visited it 3 times, and what's that?
Just hit your arm up, Michael. I think it's the cable. Yeah. You're giving off some sort of magnetic field, I think.
I visited it 3 times and looked down from the from the hill on this, and it was absolutely beautiful. And then I thought, there must be some meaning of that, and I spent days staring at it. It was one of those beautiful formations I'd ever seen. And one Saturday morning, Karen Douglas called me up and said, perhaps that dot, you can see the dot to the right of the center circle. Perhaps that dot is a decimal point, and perhaps those 3 circles at the top implies dot, 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 and then thesis, which means numerically an infinite number. So I suddenly realized that what was being telegraphed here was a long number. Next slide. There are 2 basic ways of dividing a circle. Radial, like dividing a pizza, and in the case of this formation, it was tenfold, and concentric, which is when you throw a pebble into still water and you get ripples generated outwards. That's concentric. And again, in this formation, it was tenfold. Next slide. If you start at the center, and the pathway was all swept outwards, and you went from the black circle out to the first red arc, you go round there, you take in 3 slices of pizza, and then you come to the decimal point. You go out to the violet arc, and you take in 1 slice of pizza. You go out to the yellow arc, and you take in 4 slices of pizza. Go out again to the dark blue, 1 slice. Go out again to the green, 5 slices. And suddenly I realized that it was tracing pi. It was tracing the number of pi. It was, I mean, forget what it embodied. It was a beautiful artwork. But to embody this level of encoded arithmetic is staggering. Now, I was just blown away by this. I wasn't the first to discover it. A guy in America had fallen on it a couple of days before me. But I was very pleased, obviously. And then my pal, Gary King, for whose introduction I say thank you, called me up and said, Michael, you love that formation at Oliver's Castle. I can get you in there. And I said, I'm not going in to destroy wheat with my wheelchair. He said, no. There's a bridle path which cuts through the field and goes right to the road. So I drove one momentous moments in my life. I drove there and got my wheelchair out, and I went to the centre of the circle, and I was able to take some of the measurements I needed. And I have to say, I was blown away. But going beyond that, next slide, here's the other thing, that Bert Janssen, a Dutch researcher, discovered that the bridle path indicated one side of a square which perfectly squared circle 9 of the formation. Next slide, please. Here is the first formation we had this year. Very simple formation. This is the first one of 2019. Next slide. And here you can see that the internal measurement of the orbit ring precisely concerns the circle, shown here in green, while the outer edge of the orbit ring houses a square which precisely squares the circle. Now, I think I must end here, apart from the fact that I'm going to tell you the secret of the story. I think the story is particularly useful to us because we are the scorpion and the crop circles are the frog trying to save us, trying to swim across the river. But they know what they're dealing with. They know our fickle, aggressive, acquisitive nature, as well as admiring our grace and inventiveness. So they are absolutely immune to our sting. And it's a sign of their love for us that they're going to swim us across the river. I think that's all I know.